Welcome back to another episode of Marketing Girly by Sky Society. Today, I am chatting with Lauren Kaiser. She is the Senior Director of B2B Marketing at the New York Times. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on, Lauren. Today in Lauren's episode, we're going to talk about a lot. Lauren started at Thomson Reuters. She then went over to a couple of different fashion startups before ending up at the New York Times. So we're going to chat through her journey. We're going to talk all about interview prep and how kind of the behind the scenes of what that looks like, and then jumping into some B2B marketing and an overview of what a career in B2B marketing can look like. So before we jump into all of that fun stuff, Lauren, can you tell me a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi. Who I am originally from California, and then I kind of just dive in. I graduated in the recession, which was
Mm.
honestly, we thought we were doing like a financial class in school, and we were like, I think there's a glitch in the stock market system. And it was like, oh no, that was just the financial crash.
No.
And so that was like December of 2028. And then right after that, I was job hunting and like really struggling to find anything. And I got an internship. The dean of my college sent around an internship opportunity. And I was kind of like, I've already graduated. I don't want an internship. I took it. It was in New York. And I was on a flight to New York and lived in a Craigslist apartment and like made it work. And that was then it became kind of a 3-month long interview where I was like, please hire me, please hire me, please hire me. Like, I can't go back. I need to be like get a full-time job. And they hired me. And that was like the last 14 years of my life. I ended up being in New York. And then about a year ago, I moved down to St. Pete to live closer to my parents because I had a baby.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, so very excited to jump into your journey. It's interesting hearing your perspective of graduating in the recession and having no opportunities. I feel like that relates a
Yeah.
little bit to what people felt like during the pandemic. If you graduated around then and were like, the world's shut down, like,
Mhm.
so when you're, and yeah, I know you mentioned that. So you moved to New York without even having the job yet. You were just going there for the interview. Is that correct?
No, I actually got the interviews on the phone. I did virtual before virtual was even really a thing. And then packed my bags and moved there 2 weeks later. But I
Okay.
knew no one. I was had no idea I cannot believe how ballsy I was in retrospect. But yes, I made it work.
I feel like sometimes it's that naivete that comes with being young,
Yes.
where you don't really think through everything. And then looking back, you're like, oh my gosh, why did I ever like have
Yeah,
and survive that? So
totally.
so I know back in that time, like I said, I think there's a lot of people that can relate to experiencing something similar, like during the pandemic when they were trying to start their
Mhm.
careers and no one was hiring. Do you have any, advice or insight into what it looked like during that time? I mean, I can't even imagine if that was worse than what it was like in the pandemic, or the fear that there must have been like of needing to get a job and not really finding any opportunity. How did you navigate that fear?
I would say, never underestimate the power of your network. I know that sounds so cliche, but really, I would not have gotten that opportunity. The reason why that was even an opportunity that was floated around was because the person who hired me, my first boss, he had gone to the same college as I did. So he put it out to the dean, like, hey, do you have anyone? And I was one of 5 kids that got this email, and I just was like, I'm going to get this. And was so, I was obsessed with going to New York and the opportunity was just there. And it was kind of like, you know what, whatever this is, it is my foot in the door. And even the role that I got hired on to be, it was like an executive assistant role, which is so not what I wanted to do at all. And I think I was a terrible executive assistant, but I made it work, and I just knew if I kept showing up and kept doing a great job, then I could eventually shape it into what I wanted to do. But it was so hard. I mean, I was thinking, and before we connected for the podcast, what I was thinking about when I was that age, and you're just really flailing around a lot. I feel like people don't really give credit to how hard it is. And you don't really know what you want to do. And you have this existential crisis over your head at all times of what am I going to do? What am I going, who am I? What is my brand? And then a few years pass by and you're like, I'm stuck in this position and I can't get out, and nobody ever wants to think of me as like being able to do this. So like it is kind of critical to make that first right step into this job, because the longer you keep going, the more you keep working, the harder it is to like break out of that pathway.
Mhm.
And people totally do all the time, but like sometimes you don't want to have to go back to grad school to be able to make that huge shift. And it's like a lot. So I think my advice for somebody in that is just to be completely open. Like I did not want an internship. Thankfully it was paid. I like ate empanadas every night and rice and beans. Like I just was like willing to do what it takes to like make it work. And I think being in that, when you're young, you have so much flexibility and freedom that you don't realize it's like wasted on the youth, like the older you get, the more responsibilities you have, the like nicer your apartment is going to be and the higher your mortgage is going to be. And like when you're young, you're just like, I don't care. Give me a twin bed in like a 4-person apartment. Like, I don't care. Like, let me do it. So I think like embracing that and just testing a lot of things is so valuable. And my advice that I always give to people is like, you're going to learn so much about what you want to do by doing things that you don't want to do. So, like, if you start doing a job and you're like, this sucks, I hate this, like, I hate this and I hate this, you're like, that is not the right opportunity for me. And like, let me move into the things that I do like to do. Um, and I think like for me, I was trying to like find those areas of like when I was kind of in a zone, and like when I would like put my head up and be like, oh shit, it's been a few hours and I've been working on this. And like, I really love, like it doesn't matter. Like time has passed and I'm just like in it and I'm happy and like I want to make it work and I'm thinking about it. Like those are the areas to like lean into and like start trying to like find your career and like find your sweet spot in those opportunity areas that like you're naturally inclined, because whatever you're like naturally inclined and that's your strength, you should just continue to build on that versus like starting at the very bottom and trying to build a strength from there.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful perspective to have, and really great advice for people that are young in their career, because you're right. It is, I like your example of like you're flailing around. Like you don't really know, and there's, I feel like, immense pressure and this rush
Yeah.
to figure everything out. And a lot of times those early jobs, because you don't know who you are yet, you also don't know what jobs are the best fit for you yet. So you are likely going to find yourself in a role that you are unhappy or unsatisfied in. But your perspective there of, okay, I don't like this job, but that's a way for me to learn about myself, of what I don't like. And also, okay, are there moments in this, job I'm unhappy at where I'm actually, enjoying, or there's parts of it that I really like, and using that as an learning opportunity for yourself, I think is a great way to kind of to find a positive, or to find the good in a role you may not love.
Yeah. Great
So
summary.
yes. Well, you did I think a great job there, giving some good advice for a situation I think a lot of people are in. So Lauren, you and I also love stories where, the first job out of college isn't the beautiful dream job that's super exciting to post on LinkedIn. So you mentioned that you weren't even in marketing at this point yet. You're an executive assistant. So how did
Right.
you make that transition from executive assistant into marketing?
I think I did a lot of coffees and like informational chats, and like there were a lot of different career paths that I was trying to think through. I remember I took this like gigantic financial exam because I was working at Thomson Reuters, which was like the financial arm of the news business, which is it's generally a gigantic business of like 50,000 people worldwide. And I took this like huge financial exam and I'm like, what am I doing? Like, I don't care about like fixed income and bonds and blah, blah, blah. And like now it's ironic because like now I'm kind of like reading financial books and like, oh, I should really know more about this. But at the time, I just did a lot of like chats and like, hey, can I come and like see what you're doing? I like made it clear to my bosses that like I wanted to do more and I wanted to learn more. And they set me up with other people. So like I went and I talked to like instructional designers, I like did a lot of production work with them. Like my internship was really just building out. We took over a conference room and built out a webcast studio and like put all of the training online, and like had my friend who was hired on, who we're still friends today, and like she was the host, and like we just built out a complete production studio. And that's what I was like running on my day to day. And I had a lot of fun with that, but I was like, what am I like, is this what I'm going to do? I don't know. And I ended up just, working my way towards the marketing department, found an opportunity and like had built a really good name for myself, that I was able to transfer internally and like get that, secure that role. There's a lot of credit to like being already in an org. I feel like a lot of opportunities that are available, even now at the Times, it's like, well, this person already totally gets what we do. We don't have to train. They understand the culture, like there's so much more to that. So having that insight, like if I was going back, I'd be like, let me choose the right company that has that culture that I can at least just get my foot in the door. And then I can like find and navigate to the role that I want.
Got it. Okay. Um, and your role, as you mentioned, so you were doing marketing here and it was marketing like within finance. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Did you have
And
a finance
post,
background?
no, no, not at all. I was just like learning it on the fly. And it was really a sales enablement kind of role. And I remember just being very frustrated that, I was in my 20s. I was supporting people who were much older than me. It was a business, of a lot of middle-aged men, and they were like, I would go into these conferences or conference rooms and they would be hosting meetings and it was just like all jargon. Like I felt like everything was designed so that nobody knew what anyone else was talking about. Or maybe it was just all like hubbub to like make them seem important. But like I would
Yeah.
take copious notes and then I would read my notes and I'd be like, no one said anything. Like it was just so ridiculous to me. And yeah, I think like I was advocating like we need to be on Twitter, we need to be running social campaigns. Like, can we put everything in like a Google Calendar? And I was trying really hard to like bring everyone up to a digital age. And it was very challenging being such a like legacy business that was not embracing digital. And at some point, like post reset, there were layoffs every 6 months. So like it was just we were like all hanging on to the ship that was like sinking, trying to just like keep doing our jobs. But it was really hard to like innovate or really think and like be creative in those kinds of environments. I like had great bosses and like very nurturing a little bit. I wanted more. I wanted like more freedom and more creative freedom. And I had a lot of friends that were like in advertising agencies, like going and doing ridiculous things like pig runs, with like their shops and like having just like insane like beer palooza kind of days. And I was like, what? Like we're like working two different, completely different jobs. And that seems so much more fun. So anyways, I ended up like leaving there Thomson Reuters and going to a like digital startup that was a digital consulting business. And I was like the 12th person that they had hired. I was the only marketing person and I really just like built their brand from scratch. And I had a ton of creative license. Like there was a whole team of web developers in Argentina that I worked with. So I just like built out the website and they were able to do it in-house. Like it was just super fun. Um, yeah. So I don't even know where your question had gone, but I'll
No,
stop there.
I'm hooked on this story and on the journey. And you had mentioned, earlier, okay, like if you are unhappy in a role, what you can learn there is what you don't like and where you want to be next.
Yeah.
So it's a complete switch to your next couple roles, like tiny company, very tech focused. And I know you spent the next couple of years kind of in this space, those smaller startups. And then
Mhm.
you've also, I noticed, switched from finance over to fashion.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me a little bit about this time working at these smaller companies? Maybe about an area you're more interested, like you're more interested in fashion, maybe you're getting to be more in tech. Like, what was that like? Did you like it more than your experience over, in big finance? And kind of what did you learn in this part of your life?
Yeah, I would say I learned a lot of great lessons. I basically did like a, 180 of like going from a very legacy built like business to a very digital first. Everything has to be digital, and across most of the companies that then I went and worked for. And all the startups were like super scrappy, and it was great because I was able to just like completely expand my horizons and dabble in a ton. But I think through all of that I was doing, and like, I was working fashion weeks, like it was just so much fun. And I like loved the actual content and like the people that I was working with. But at the end of the day, after a string of a lot of startups, I was not getting like, I kind of just was like, you know what, when was the last time I really felt like I had a boss that like had my back, or that that I was learning and that I wasn't self-sufficiently learning, like I was taking a ton of classes at night, but I wasn't really like learning from a boss who was in the marketing space. It was always me reporting to like the CEO or the CMO, and not really feeling nurtured. And then that kind of took me back full circle of like, I need to be in a bigger organization where there's a lot more structure. Like right now, I'm running myself ragged. I'm not getting paid, as much as I would like. And I don't have the benefits, and there's not a lot of security. And, like there's not as much professionalism as I am looking forward to having, to be honest.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, and for some people, I think really thrive in the startup environment. So I also enjoy getting both, different perspectives in
Yeah.
that area. But it is true, like you are teaching yourself everything. And so oftentimes, which is
Yeah.
amazing because you get to touch everything, you get to have, you're learning a lot. But like you said, sometimes it's like, well, you can miss the structure and support that a larger company gives. And so it is always, I always love hearing when guests kind of get both perspectives and like which kind of lane they fall into. Normally, I feel like a lot of times later on, they'll end up at, a more established company because
Yeah,
there is a lot of great benefits that come with it, but they'll always kind of attribute like a lot of growth and learning to that startup phase. Would you kind of agree? Are you in
absolutely.
the same kind of camp?
It's like you're earning or you're learning.
Yeah, there we go.
Mhm.
Also, Lauren, you mentioned that you were doing a lot of night classes, and on your LinkedIn, you have quite a few different
Yeah.
certificates. I would love to pick your brain there for a second because I know there's a lot of girls that are in the Sky Society community that do a lot of certifications because it's a great way to kind of build up your skill set. Can you speak to maybe, so I'm going to read out quickly what Lauren has, and then Lauren, if you can tell us like maybe what your favorite one was or kind of what you recommend
Sure.
there. But so after her bachelor's, you got a certificate in digital media marketing from NYU, visual design from General Assembly, intermediate graphic design from just a school of visual arts. So I'm assuming a school of visual arts,
That's
and
so
then
sick.
women's leadership program at Yale. So why did you kind of decide to go get these extra certifications and programs, and kind of do you think that they were instrumental for you in growing your career?
Yeah, I think the NYU one was a really great pivot for me. That was what I was able to get out of kind of this financial Thomson Reuters world where, like I needed those skills that I wasn't doing in my day to day. So that was a great way for me to pivot. It was a very long process. And, within the 2 years that it took, like, or a year and a half, so much changed in technology. Like it was just rapid fire. And I don't think the classes could really keep up. So that is my only watch out is like, before you embark in like such a long educational like commitment, make sure that like it can't just already be achieved in something that's a very short stint. And then I took a visual design class and I completely loved it. I was like, that's what I mean, when I was like in my zone, I was like staying up till like midnight, doing all this crazy stuff in Photoshop for like no reason, just other than like I enjoyed this class and I needed to be able to learn how to like put together, email marketing stuff and all of the flyers and blah, blah, blah. And I needed to like, there was no design help. So I had to teach myself. So I did that, which then led to like SVA. I just wanted to kind of cut to like a deeper level of that. But to answer your question, what my favorite one was by far the women's leadership program at Yale. It was definitely expensive. It was subsidized, by my stellar workplace tuition program. It was more of like experienced leaders that were there. And it was basically 1 week full intensive at Yale, specific to women, and just really getting into leadership. And I learned so much. Like, I didn't really know how much I was learning when I was in the course. And I was kind of like, wow, this is a lot. Like, I forgot we had to read at night. And like, there's just like you're networking and you're eating amazing food and then you're learning so much and you're kind of like, it's all a whirlwind and it's just like jam packed into 1 week. But then when people have asked me about the program or like, just asking about career advice, I have all of these things constantly come back into my mind about lessons that we learned or like exercises that we did there. So I think that one really, really stuck with me more than just like, like I cannot remember Illustrator from the SBA class that I did because I have not been having to do that in my career, but like the softer skills of, everything that I learned for the leadership program was super helpful.
What can you tell us, maybe your favorite thing that you took from the leadership program or any advice you got from that program you think would be beneficial for women in marketing?
Yeah, I think number one is like lean into your strengths. Like you've opened up the program by doing like a whole 360. So you ask like your parents, your siblings, your partner, like your coworkers, like everyone writes in and talks about what you're really good at. And so the day one that you get there, you open this up and you're like, oh my God, it's like very heartwarming. But you can really see the themes of like I'm really good at this. Like my brother talked about me planning like our cross country trip through, like all of the national parks and like, how detail oriented I was. And then my boss wrote this, and then my coworker wrote this. And it's like all of these things kind of mapped back to be like, oh, this is a strength of mine. This is something that like I think it's just a given for everyone, but it's actually something that I'm good at specifically, and I should lean into that. And the whole premise of the course is like, not whole premise, but like the beginning, it's like, if you're not great at like Excel functions, like let it go. There's somebody else that's going to be their a killer strength and they can come up and like you guys will be a world-class team. Like what you need to do is work on your like where you really naturally shine and like lean into those areas and just like build those up. So that was like a great lesson, especially as, I mentioned like flailing through your 20s and like, I should be able to do this and I should be able to do that. And it's kind of just like, let it go and just focus on like what your natural abilities are, because you're going to be so much more leaned in. And those are going to be your like zones where you're super enthusiastic to work on those things that like you're good at, and the more you get good at something, the more you want to do it because you're just like, yes, like I'm killing it. Um, so that was one lesson. The other lesson that was like more of an exercise that we did was I'll like shorten this, but we got like this like crazy list of like, here's all of the tools that you would have. Like, you have rope and you have a gas like bucket and blah, blah, blah. And you get stranded on an island and there's a hurricane coming and you need to make sure that nobody dies. And you guys are in a group together and there's the 6 of you and you have to like
Oh
survive
my
through the
gosh.
storm. How are you going to do it? And here's the list of things that you have. You can only carry 12 of these things off the boat. And like, what are you going to do? And so basically then you go into a room and it's videotaped and you're all like hashing it out and you're kind of like, no, I think we need the shoes to climb up the hill and be able to like carry somebody on a piggyback versus like, do we really need the plastic tarp to build a shelter in a hurricane? And like everyone's hashing it out. And then you watch it, then somebody else comes in who's way more qualified, says what you actually need to have, and you're like, oh, totally missed that. We all died. And anyways, in through that whole exercise, when you watch the playback, you're like, wow, the people that were right were the people that were not super forward and not very, their voices weren't as strong. And then the people that were so wrong were the people that were the loudest and they were adamant and they were like, no, we need to have this and blah, blah, blah. So like the whole lesson there is don't always follow the loudest person in the room. The one that talks the most in the meeting doesn't necessarily have everything right. And that's their personality, is to talk the most, and that there's a lot to be said to like hearing other voices and like making space for those people that don't talk as much.
Yeah, I think I've shared this example on an episode a long time ago, but that sort of reminds me of I did like some class in high school and they were giving this example of an interview. It was like an interview panel and they asked like a disaster type question, like, what would you do? And all these people started like giving suggestions. But one girl, she started asking questions and she started asking,
Mm.
well, like, what type of natural disaster is it? Is it localized or is it national? And all these questions. And long story short, like she ended up getting that role and opportunity because she approached it more inquisitively versus being like, I know the answer and like this is it. Um,
Yeah.
and that reminds me of that because I think, and it can be like, you are, more quiet and you're listening, which is great. But I also think it's like sometimes the best like voice to have is also like to ask questions and to learn more before like jumping in and assuming that you know an answer. I don't know why, but that story like had always stuck with me like forever.
Yeah.
And I always try to approach things if it's something new, it's like starting by asking questions versus assuming that you have all the answers and that you know everything.
Hmm.
Very interesting, these like little workshops that they're having you do in this
Yeah.
leadership program. That is incredible.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I love those two little anecdotes. I hope our listeners can get some good little nuggets out of that. So let's kind of move over, Lauren, to your current role at the New York Times. So can you,
Yeah.
before jumping into what your role entails, can you tell us how you got this role? Because I know you mentioned that the interview process was kind of crazy.
Yeah. So when I started at the job before the New York Times, like day one, somebody who was supposed to be on my team got let go and she got a job at the New York Times. And so then 6 months later, when I was like, I've got to get into a normal workplace again, I contacted her and like she was my and
Oh
it's
my
so
God.
funny because we literally worked together for one day, but we had a lot to bond over. And, I got into the New York Times that way, but I was like, I really wanted it. And we had my mom's birthday trip in Greece, and I was coming back and I had the interview, and I was like, oh, I'll just, I'll like get prepared in the trip and blah, blah, blah. And my parents were asking me like mock interview questions in the living room in this like Airbnb. And thought I was so great. And then I was bombing it. And I was like, oh my God, I need to get my shit together. And I spent the entire like 8 or 10 hour flight heads down reading like a interview book of like how to kill an interview and or like how to nail the interview or whatever. I forget what the book was called, but I can send it to you. And I just like took copious notes, like 15 pages of notes. I
Oh my gosh.
over indexed. I like researched the shit out of the New York Times. Like I knew every fact on hand. And then I like ripped apart the job description and like created this whole like new almost like cheat sheet for myself of like here are all the soft skills I identified and then like here are synonyms for those soft skills that I need to reiterate in my like interviews. And then
Mm.
here are all the hard skills and like same thing. Like I need to be able to like drill down and talk to all these things. And then here are all of the like questions that I think that they're going to ask. And like here's a separate example of how I've done this, like in the STAR method for every single question that I could like think of. So I had like 8 to 10 examples that I wanted to talk through in my interview. Like I really, really, really showed up. I had like flashcards, like I was just like there. I was like power posing in the elevator, like ready to have it. And it was slightly an excruciating process. Like my initial interview went great. I had a panel of like 4 people. So 2 hour block. And then I sat and waited for like 3 weeks. And like every Friday, I'd be like, check with the recruiter and was just like, this is either going to make my weekend or break my weekend. And like, I'm
Oh
so
my
angry.
gosh.
And then he'd be like, oh, sorry, we'll have more updates soon. And like this happened for like literally 3 or 4 weeks. And then the
Oh my
final
gosh.
week when I was like supposed to hear something and I didn't, he was like, and we want you to come back in and have one more round with like my boss's boss. And I was like, this is either going to be like a gut check of like if I'm like a jerk or not, or it's going to be like really hard and she's going to grill the shit out of me. And it ended up being like a, culture fit more than
Mhm.
that. But yeah, it was a very like intense. So like by the time I got the job, I was just like, did I really get it? Like I've been waiting and working on this for like almost 6 weeks, from like
Oh my gosh.
start to finish. Yeah.
That is wild. So first of all, I love how you mentioned how much time you spent interviewing because I think that's such an overlooked piece. I think when people or sorry, how long you spent doing your interview prep. So I think when
Yeah.
people think, oh, prepare for an interview, I think everyone thinks like, oh yeah, let me practice some interview questions, but I think we forget how important it is to, like you said, rip apart the job description and also really understand the company that you're interviewing for. And the more like time you spend, the more confident you're going to feel in the interview and the more intelligent I think you'll sound. I am curious because you mentioned that you read a book. Is there anything in that book that you learned that you feel like really helped you in the interview process?
Yeah, it was called Winning the Interview. And the I guess the through line of the book is that managers want, the hiring manager wants somebody that has done the job before and is willing to do the job again. Like any manager just wants to know, have you done the job and are you willing to do this job again? And so being able to prove out, I've done this job, even if you're like, transitioning careers or whatever, you still have to show like I have transferable skills that show that like I can do this job and I'm so enthusiastic and I want to do it again. And I'm not going to be like, oh, this job's above me because I've already done it. Like you need to be
Mhm.
showing that you want it and that you like love doing it and you're happy and you're going to be happy in that role. So I would say like that's the one thing that I always tell people is like you've done the job and you want to do the job again. That's like all you really need to prove out through the interview process.
Okay, I've never heard it phrased that way. I love that. Okay, so I've
Yeah.
done the job and I want to do it again.
Yeah.
Okay, and that book was called Winning the Interview.
Hmm.
Okay, definitely I think worth
Very old
sharing.
school. Like, like I don't even think the internet was around when this whoever wrote that book, but it was great.
But sometimes I feel like the older books are almost the best because they're very like direct and to the point, and I feel like
Yeah.
there's probably a newer version of it, but it's just like regurgitating it and like saying it in more modern terms. I love my older books. One of my books that I always recommend is called Psycho-Cybernetics. I don't know if you've
Hmm.
heard of it, but it's basically manifestation, but it doesn't call it manifestation because it's like this is like
Okay.
before that was a term, so it like talks about it in like scientific perspective and the psychology of being able to like visualize and stuff. But anyways, I love that book, and then I read all these other books around self-help, and they always like draw back to this one like older,
Yeah.
which I think is beautiful about older books. But okay, so that was your experience on the interview side. So can you talk to me a little bit about now being on the other side? So now being at New York Times, you've been there for almost 6 years, which is amazing. What are some kind of things, other mistakes that you notice in candidates, or kind of what has your experience been being the one interviewing others?
Yeah. So I am also very old school, I guess, going with I'm not, but like in this sense, I am of like show up and like dress respectively, like I feel like such a grandma saying that. But I've had people, candidates interview, and granted, I've been like on the panel, so I'm not the hiring manager, but like in a sports bra kind of tank top. And I'm like, dude, we
No.
are the New York Times. Like we're digital first, like we're super innovative, we're like media, like we're like one of the badasses in media, but like this is not that casual, like, and it's an interview, like you don't need to be wearing a blazer, but like put yourself together and like those kinds of things of like having messed up hair, da, da, da. Like it just shows me like how much you put into this, like how much effort you give. And I think that's like step one is like baseline of just, like really show up. Like this is like your moment to shine. And like if you need to go buy an outfit to make yourself feel like you're super polished to go into it, like do it, like just invest in yourself and like take that care. So that's like a general thing that I think applies across like all roles. And then thank you notes. Like, I can't believe that people don't send thank you notes. I do not need a handwritten thank you note, but like, I need a thank you note to show me that like you gave a shit. And then because I do a ton of writing in my role, I judge people by their thank you notes. Like, when I've had candidates and I'm like comparing all of their thank you notes and I'm like, who wrote me the best thank you note? That will like lean me in a different direction. And,
What
like,
makes
of
a good
who I
thank
want
you
to
note?
I think when it's really personalized, this is also something that I did in my interview. I found like a common ground with whoever I was speaking to. And then in the thank you note, I wrote them like specific things of like recommendations that I had, like say we connected on like podcasts. And then I'd be like, oh my gosh, these are the 3 podcasts that I like completely love. Like, I think you would too. Or, I had a candidate
Oh.
came in who she just like had quit her job. we're still friends today, and she'd quit her job, and she was like, she had been working at Flywheel, and she was like, I just, like, I just want to like, I love Flywheel. It's not my career. I'm just doing it until I find my next career. And then I was like, oh, who are your favorite classes? And like, which instructors are the best? And she like followed up in the email to me with like, here are the instructors that I recommend. And I was just like, yes, thank you. You got me. Like,
Uh,
when
I
I'm working with you on a day to day, you're the person that I want to chat with when we're like figuring something out, not just like,
yeah,
thank you for your time and blah, 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 blah. Like, when it's just like somebody's copying and pasting something versus
yeah,
someone has actually taken a lot of care and consideration to like think through what they want to say and like
yeah.
reiterate what was said throughout the conversation.
I love that. I've actually, you're the first time I've heard that perspective on a podcast. And I think that is so valuable because one, I think with ChatGPT now, everyone's going there for so many of their application
Yeah.
materials. And so I think a beautiful way to stand out is, like you said, make it really personalized. And I hope if you're in the Sky Society community, you are sending thank you emails because we say that a lot. But I also agree that a lot of them are always templated and a lot of people do send thank you emails. And so a great way to stand out. I love that examples of connecting with the interviewer. And even if it's small like that, I've even used that when I started the podcast and I didn't have a lot of guests. I didn't have, a brand yet. I would do like some digging in my, if I read in their LinkedIn bio, they said something silly about loving brunch, that would be my in with them is like, let's,
Yeah.
and I think those little like things, like everyone loves to feel seen, like all of us do,
Yeah.
in your relationships with your friendships, you like to feel seen. And I think being able to translate that in an interview is such a great way. And people also hire people that they like, right? Because like,
Yes.
and I feel like that's also overlooked. And so what a great way to make a personal connection. So amazing advice. Thank you. I love that.
Great.
Was there other stuff on your list? I think I may have interrupted you on mistakes that you see candidates make.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's just like a general preparedness, like who knows, do you know the mission of the company? Like, for me, if somebody doesn't talk about how much they love the New York Times when they come and talk to me, even if they've said it to everyone, it's an interview. You should say it again. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you should at least address the journalism that you're supporting in this role that you're going after, and for people to just like bypass that and not talk about it or just like assume that it's there, I think that's just like a huge mistake. And I've like cut off people for that, being like, they are not really showing enthusiasm for like working here. And in my mind, if they're not now, are they in like 2 years? Or are they going to be like jumping ship? There's just so much investment that goes in and like not even from like HR and blah, 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 but there's like a lot of investment of being a peer of someone else and then upskilling them and training them and showing them how your world works and like what you do. And then like it sucks when they leave. So if you're not showing in the interview process that you're like really committed and like this is like a passion and this is like a dream come true and you're really into it, then like it's not going to move the needle for the other person on the other side.
Yeah, I love also too that all these tips you're giving don't have anything to do with being qualified for the role.
Yeah.
I like these are kind of all things that you have control over, regardless if you meet the qualifications or whatnot. Like you can make an incredible thank you note. You can show enthusiasm in the role. You could come prepared for it. Those are
Yeah.
all very actionable, which I really love.
Yeah. My other thing that I like, tell everyone that I hire is, like the job description is like very aspirational and is really showing probably like 60 to 80% of like what you're going to be doing. The rest is just curveballs that you're going to be, getting and having while you're in the job. Like my job is completely transformed from when I started, and I'm totally okay with that. But like, so it's less about like, can you do all of these bullet points? You need to be able to show that you can like learn it. But I'd so much really rather work with someone that's super enthusiastic and wants and is hungry and like wants to learn all of the things, because it doesn't matter if I can teach you. What I
Mm-hmm.
need to do is like know that you're going to be like cool to work with and that I enjoy, like, you're not going to be an asshole.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think, yeah, amazing. Everyone's taking notes because again, I think those are just such great things that you can just be more cognizant of and more mindful in
Yeah.
your interviews. And I love hearing the like learning one because I think, a lot of our audience too is newer in your career and it's not that you're expected to know everything, but that you are expected to be a quick learner and be willing to learn. And so
Yeah.
leaning into that in your interview, I think is really valuable. All right. So, Lauren, let's get into kind of the meat of what your role looks like at the New York Times. So, I know you've been here for quite a while. I don't know if you want to share kind of like where you started versus where you are now, or just kind of give us an overview of kind of what your job looks like as the senior director of B2B marketing at the New York Times.
Yeah, I'll kind of talk about like what I do now, but I think taking it, knowing that I've been there almost 6 years, which is wild.
Mhm.
I have like a lot of hodgepodge of things that probably wouldn't fall under a typical job description, but like really with B2B marketing, I have like more classic marketing of brand marketing. So like, web, social, emails, like more building out the brand that we've done for New York Times advertising. Um, and then I have content and culture. So really like all the culture initiatives that we want to do through our department, and also all of the industry events that we show up for. I lead all of the prep. So just to give an example, like, we're having clients and we're entertaining them and we're having a dinner for them, and we want to have Michael Barbaro come and talk about the state of the election, or someone else from the newsroom. I lead the prep, and so like coming up with all the Q&A and like all the discussion points and the intros and what everyone would say, like that comes out of my team. And then the last piece of like my role of kind of these like general buckets is just like comms. So I lead all of our PR for all of our creative campaigns and anything that's coming out of New York Times advertising, and then all internal comms. So I'm kind of like the megaphone for our department and crafting everything that goes to the entire global team.
And so now with your role being within B2B marketing and comparing it either to like other roles you had in your career, is B2B, well, first of all, can you explain B2B marketing for those who don't know? And then is it a lot different from traditional marketing?
Yeah, I'll say, so my role is, maybe I can just take it like a step back. There's New York Times overall, and there's a brand marketing team of the New York Times, and they're very focused on the subscriber. So, like how are we getting more subscriptions, the B2B or like B2C, all in like, and building up that brand. My job is for New York Times advertising, and my audience, or New York Times advertising audience, is marketers and brands. So we're really like marketing to marketers. And the difference with B2B is that I'm trying to get people to come spend their ad dollars with New York Times advertising. And those are like pretty pennies, there's like a very high CPM. People don't really on a whim just decide, hey, I want to run an ad in the New York Times. Sometimes they do, but like for the most part, they're very thought out campaigns. And there's a whole lot of like relationship building between B2B and like building that, like our sellers are all going to their clients saying like, hey, I know you wanted to like have a campaign around diversity and women's sports, and like you want to show up here, like this new thing is coming up, I want to tell you about it. And that's how all the like most of the sales cycle works. And then knowing like, these buyers or these marketers only have so much money and they're spending this much money in like each quarter and they're planning out their year. We have to like hit them where we need them, like hit them in the right moment and like make sure that we're very top of mind, because there's other publishers that they can go spend their money, or they could go spend their money on different platforms. So it's really like building this like long-term, top of mind, relationship heavy brand that people rely on, versus like B2C, when I was working for like in fashion, it's just like, okay, here's the next season, and like, please spend your dollars with us. And we're going to hit you a ton of times on Facebook and Instagram and like buy the t-shirt. And this is just like a very long haul. But I think like fundamentally it's marketing, because you just need to know who your audience is, and then knowing how to approach your audience and like staying top of mind with them. It's the same across the board between B2B or B2C.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, the New York Times. So there's a department that's trying to get more people like us listeners subscribing to the
Yeah.
New York Times for a subscription. And there's your team is trying to get the companies or the brands to be spending their ad dollars with New York Times versus, anywhere else they could be spending their ads. So I know you mentioned that is B2B a little bit more relationship focused? Is that kind of where you find your role,
Yeah.
'cause you're building these relationships with these clients?
And like for my role specifically, because I'm not in sales, I think about how are we delivering value to everyone that's opening up our emails. So like, sales is going to be like, yeah, let's sell this and like, let's get them to know this. And I'm like, no, dude, slow your roll. Why would somebody open up this email? We need to be teaching them something. Like we need to have thought leadership. Like, why do you continue to open up emails from brands or anyone that you're curious about? Because you want to learn something, you want to get smarter. So like that is the lens that I put on it of what are we teaching and like why do we keep people coming back for more? Like what insights can we give them that they're not getting elsewhere, that they're like, oh, that's really interesting, let me continue reading. And then, building that like longer term relationship with us of, hey, I want to like show up to your event, I think that like sounds super cool and that will make me great at my job, and just continuing that going across all the different platforms.
Yeah, super, super interesting to hear both ends. And I love hearing more about B2B marketing because, again, I don't think that's exactly where your mind is at when you're younger, of like trying to work
Yeah.
in B2B marketing. I am curious. So you've been at the New York Times, like I said, for almost 6 years. The New York Times is very aspirational, very influential company to work for. What is your favorite part about working there?
Oh my gosh. I think it's just like the power of storytelling, and across all of its forms. And there's so much, first of all, it's a incredible culture. Like I think people probably think that it's like super liberal and super snobby. And, like we have like persona or perceptions that were like too liberal or that were like historical and we're like a legacy brand. And I think it's awesome to be on the inside and you're just like, wow, like the journalism that I see is, and like when we do awards or we have people come and we talk and they talk about their reporting, it's just like mind blowing, like these people, like this woman who just won the Pulitzer was like 8 months pregnant and she was on the front lines going and working in all, or like going to all these like slaughterhouses in like Michigan, interviewing migrant workers who were kids to like write a whole story that like dismantled, and like broke the news that like all of these immigrant children are actually working in these like super hazardous conditions doing night shifts. And it's like she was doing that while 8 months pregnant
Oh my
and like
gosh.
all, and she interviewed like 200 and something people to get that story out. And so it's just like, what other world do we live in that like somebody is putting that much energy into like delivering the truth, And I think that is honestly my favorite part. It's just like I'm always amazed and there's like just incredibly smart people. And I think that the reason why I've stayed so long is because I'm still learning and like, I'm still challenged and like, I'm just really inspired by everyone and what they do.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said for working for a brand that has a greater mission, like
Yeah.
aside from just hitting your sales numbers and knowing that the work that you're doing is supporting a larger positive impact, I think is super motivating. So okay, Lauren, we've gone over so much today, and there's been, I feel like, such an actionable episode, and I've loved every topic we've touched on. My last question for you is, can any last advice that you want to give to women in marketing? I know we've covered a lot of stuff, but is there anything else that you'd like to share to
Yeah.
someone who'd love to have a career like yours?
Um, I would say my one thing that I feel like is universal to everyone, no matter what job or role or industry, is to just do like kick-ass work, like just really show up and put everything you have into the work and like knowing that you're delivering your best and like, accepting the criticism and the inputs and blah, 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 and like helping to shape it. But like consistently just delivering really good work and making that your ultimate mission is going to get you really far. And like, like being that person that people are like, oh, I can rely on her to like deliver it. And really just like showing yourself and how much you care and like, how smart you are and how good you are at your job through your work. I think that's my through line for everyone.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Lauren, for coming on Marketing Girly. This has been such a great conversation. I am so thankful for you.
Thank you. This is fun.